The rain came down in grey sheets over the courtyard of Wexford Hall, and Margaret Ellery stood beneath the stone arch with her wet shawl gathered at her throat, watching the man on the steps who did not know her face. She had come 19 miles by post-chaise to nurse a dying countess, and she had not expected the son. He stood at the top of the wide stone stairs in a coat the color of deep water, his dark hair pushed back by the wind, and he looked at her the way a man looks at furniture that has been delivered to the wrong door. The footman beside him said her name into the storm. The Earl of Wexford did not repeat it. He only inclined his head half an inch and turned back toward the great doors, and in that small motion the whole of her situation was arranged. She had seen the pale mark below his left ear, though a small shape like a spilled drop, and her hands went cold, in a way the rain could not account for. She did not let herself think it. There was too much to carry and too little light, and a woman in service learned early that the worst thing she could do with a thought was hold it up where anyone might see it. So Margaret followed the housekeeper up a servant's stair, her boots leaving dark prints on the boards, and folded the small, terrible recognition away as she folded everything, into the place where she kept the parts of herself the world had no use for. You may already feel where this is going, and you would be partly right and mostly wrong. Stay with her a little while. She has been carrying this alone for a long time. The house was called Wexford Hall, and it sat in a fold of the Yorkshire hills where the wind came off the moor and pressed at the windows all night, like something that wanted in. The Countess was Lady Wexford, the widowed mother of the present Earl, and she was dying of a wasting complaint that had turned her hands to paper and her voice to a thread. There was a London physician who came twice a month and left tinctures and instructions and the strong impression that he would rather be elsewhere. Between his visits, there was to be a nurse, and the nurse was Margaret, engaged through an agency in York on the strength of a letter from a surgeon she had served 2 winters, a letter that called her steady and skilled and asked no questions about where she had learned it. She was 28 years old. She had a plain gray stuff gown and a good wool cloak gone thin at the shoulders, and a small trunk that held everything she owned, and in the false bottom of that trunk, wrapped in a square of oiled silk, she had a thing she had never shown to any living soul. The Countess, it happened, did not want to die quietly. She wanted to talk. On the second night, Margaret sat by the great bed with a single candle and a basin of cooled water, and the old woman turned her head on the pillow and studied the nurse's face with eyes still sharp inside their ruin. "You do not flinch," Lady Wexford said. The last one flinched. She thought dying was catching. "It is not catching, my lady," Margaret said. "It is only lonely. I can do something about the second thing." The Countess made a sound that might once have been a laugh. Her fingers, when Margaret took them to check the pulse, were cold and light as a bundle of dry reeds. "Where did they find you?" she said. "Not quite a question." "York, my lady." "Through the agency." "That is not what I asked." Margaret bathed the thin wrist and did not answer, and the old woman, being clever, let it go. And that first surrender of curiosity was the beginning of something between them that neither would have called by its name. Night after night, Margaret came with her candle and her basin, and the Countess talked, and Margaret listened and turned her and eased her and read to her, when the voice gave out, and in the talking, the shape of the house arranged itself around them. The Earl's name was Julian. He had come into the title 4 years past, on the death of a father who had gambled the estate down to its bones, and he had spent those 4 years hauling it back by main force, dismissing the dishonest steward, draining the flooded low fields, refusing every soft loan that would have cost him the land in the end. He rode out at dawn and came back after dark. He did not go to London for the season, did not dance, did not court. The county had decided what he was, and the county said it freely. "They call him the Cold Earl," the Countess said one night, her voice dry with something that was not quite amusement. "In the village, in the drawing rooms at Harrogate. The Cold Earl of Wexford, who buried his heart with his brother and will not spend a shilling on a smile." She turned her ruined eyes toward the window and the dark beyond it. They are fools. Yet they are not entirely wrong about the brother. Margaret's hands went still on the folded linen. He had a brother. He had a brother, the old woman said, and would say no more that night, and Margaret carried the 2 words back to her narrow room and lay awake with them, and with the pale, drop-shaped mark below a stranger's ear, and with the oiled silk parcel in the false bottom of her trunk that she had not opened in 7 years. She had been 21. That is the part she never told, the part that lived under everything. Newly widowed, her young husband, a curate dead of a fever, in his 2nd year of the living, she had been left with nothing but his books, and a child 6 weeks in her arms, and no family that would own her, for she had married against them, and they had meant their word. She had walked to the coaching inn at Selby in the rain, with the child wrapped against her, meaning to reach a cousin in Leeds who might not turn her away, and she had not reached Leeds. She had fallen ill on the road. A man had found her. She remembered almost nothing of him. A dark coat, a voice that did not shout, hands that lifted the child out of her failing arms when she could no longer hold him. She remembered the rain, and being carried, and a fire somewhere, and a woman's face, and then the long white blank of the fever. And when she came back to herself, she was in a poorhouse infirmary, in a town she did not know. And the child was gone. And no one could tell her anything except that a gentleman had left money for her keep, and taken the boy to be cared for. Out of Christian charity, they said, out of pity for a fever-struck stranger who would surely die. She had not died. She had lived, and she had spent a year on that road, asking at every inn and every parish within 30 miles, and she had found nothing, because a gentleman who does a kindness on a rainy road does not leave his name for a beggar woman to trace. She had learned nursing because the infirmary that saved her had needed hands, and she had needed bread, and she had gone on being good at it for 7 years. In all that time she had kept one thing. When they had lifted the child from her arms, she had, in the last clear moment before the fever took her, pressed her thumb to the small mark below his left ear, the drop-shaped mark her husband had borne, and his father before him, a mark that ran in that family like a signature. She had memorized it with her thumb. The thing in the oiled silk was not the mark, but the christening gown she had sewn, with a lock of dark infant hair stitched into the hem, and a curate's hand that had written a name and a date, on a scrap of paper that no court in England would honor without more. The child would be 7 now. And below the ear of the cold Earl of Wexford's dead brother, if the Countess were to be believed, there had been such a mark, for it ran in the Wexford line as it had run in her husband's, and she began, lying awake in the narrow room, to understand a thing she was not ready to understand. She said nothing. What was there to say? And to whom? A nurse does not walk into the Earl's study and announce that his household holds a child who is hers. She had no proof but a gown and a memory. She had learned what happened to women who made such claims against men of rank. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She watched, and she waited, and she nursed the dying woman who had begun, without either of them deciding it, to trust her. The Earl she saw seldom. He came to his mother's room each evening, whatever the hour of his return, and he sat by the bed for a quarter of an hour, and held the thin hand, and spoke low. And he did not look at the nurse in the corner. Margaret made herself small and useful and invisible, and she watched him from beneath her lashes, the way his jaw set, the way his hands were careful with the old woman, as they were careful with nothing else. And she thought that whatever the county said, a man who held his mother's hand like that had not buried his heart anywhere. Then, on a night near the end of her 2nd week, the boy appeared. She was carrying a basin down the back corridor, when she heard small feet, and a child came around the corner at a run and struck her skirts and looked up, and Margaret's whole body forgot how to move. He was small and dark-haired and grave, perhaps 7 years old, with a sharp chin and gray eyes, and below his left ear, plain in the light of the corridor lamp, there was a small pale mark, the shape of a spilled drop. "I beg your pardon," the child said, with the careful manners of a house that had drilled them into him. "I was not to run." "No harm," Margaret said. Her voice came from very far away. "No harm at all. What is your name?" "Thomas," the boy said. "I live here. His lordship is my guardian." And then, because children volunteer the things adults would kill to know, "My own people are dead. I do not remember them. I was very small." The basin was shaking in her hands. She set it down so that it would not fall. "How old are you, Thomas?" "7," he said. "I shall be 8 at Michaelmas. Her son had been born in the last week of August." She knelt on the cold board so that her face was level with his, and looked at the sharp chin that was her husband's chin, and the grave gray eyes that were her own, and said in a voice she kept level by an act of will that cost her everything she had, "That is a fine age to be, Thomas. Will you show me the way back to the kitchen? I have lost myself in this great house." He took her hand, trusting as the young are trusting, and led her down the corridor, chattering about a pony and a tutor he did not like, and Margaret walked beside her child, and did not weep, because if she wept she would frighten him, and she would sooner have died than frightened him. At the kitchen door he let go and ran off, and she stood in the doorway with her empty hands and understood that the earl who had left her in the rain and taken her son was the same man who now sat each evening at his mother's bedside holding a dying woman's hand. She did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the christening gown across her knees, and made herself think coldly and clearly, the way the infirmary had taught her to think over the worst cases. He did not know. That was the first thing, and she made herself hold it. Whatever he had done believing her dead and the child an orphan. He had not stolen a son from a living mother. He had lifted a dying woman's baby from her arms and given it a home and a name, and he had done it in the same season he had lost his own brother. That was not the act of a monster. It changed nothing about her grief and everything about her path. The second thing she made herself hold was harder. She could say nothing. If she spoke, she was a servant, making a claim on the earl's ward, and she would be dismissed within the hour, and shown the road with her trunk, and she would never see the boy again, and no magistrate in the county would take the word of a nurse over the word of a peer. Her only proof was a gown and a memory, and a scrap of a curate's writing. She would lose. Worse, she might poison the one good thing the boy had, which was a home. So she resolved, sitting in the dark, to do nothing at all, except stay near him as long as she was allowed, and to be, for whatever weeks the Countess had left, the invisible woman who happened to know the shape of a mark below a child's ear. It was not a resolution she could keep, but she did not know that yet. The Countess worsened through the 3rd week. There came a night when the physician's tinctures did nothing, and the old woman lay burning and muttering, and Margaret sat with her through the small hours, cooling the fever with cloths, and holding the thin body when the shaking came, and near dawn the earl came in his shirt sleeves, and he stood at the foot of the bed with his face gone gray. "Will she live until morning?" he said. It was not to Margaret, quite, but there was no one else to answer. "She will live past morning, my lord," Margaret said. "This is not the end. It is a bad night. There will be a worse. But this is not it." She laid the cloth fresh on the burning brow. "Sit with her if you like. It steadies them. To have a hand they know." He looked at her then fully for the first time since the courtyard in the rain, as though he had only just registered that the corner of the room contained a person. "You are certain. I have sat a great many of these, my lord." "I am certain of this one." He sat. He took his mother's hand, and Margaret showed him without seeming to how to hold it, so the tremor eased, and through the last black hour before the light they kept the old woman between them, and something passed in that room that neither would have named the particular intimacy of two people keeping a third alive with their hands. When the fever broke near 6, and the Countess sank into true sleep, the Earl sat back in the chair and closed his eyes, and Margaret saw the exhaustion in him that the county never saw, and she thought, "He is not cold. He is only very tired, and no one has helped him carry any of it in 4 years. Eat something," she said, surprising herself. "There is bread and dripping in the kitchen." You have been up all night and you will ride out in an hour, whatever I say, so eat first." He opened his eyes. For a moment something moved at the corner of his hard mouth that might, in a warmer man, have been the beginning of a smile. "You give orders," he said. "To the sick and the overtired, my lord. It is my trade." She gathered the basin and the cloths. "She will sleep now until midday. Go and eat, and then go and do whatever it is you do that keeps this whole house standing, and come back at evening, and she will know you." He went. And that was the first morning that the cold Earl of Wexford ate bread in his own kitchen because a nurse had told him to, and it was not the last. She had come to this house a stranger, with a buried grief and a resolution to stay invisible. Invisibility, however, is not possible for a person who is truly useful, and Margaret was useful. And week by week the household began to shape itself around her the way a garden shapes itself around water. The maids brought her their small ailments. The old cook, his knee. Thomas, forbidden the sick room, waited for her in the corridors and told her the long, serious concerns of a 7-year-old, and she learned him by heart the way he bit his lip when he was thinking, and the way he loved the pony past reason, and the way he had, already at 7, the habit of holding his griefs where no one could see them, which she recognized because it was her own habit, his father's, before him. And the Earl. The Earl came each evening, and now he sometimes stayed past the quarter hour, and now he sometimes spoke to the nurse as well as to the patient, and once, when the Countess was sleeping, he stood at the dark window and said without turning, "My mother tells me you will not say where you learned your skill." It is not an interesting story, my lord. She thinks it is. She says you are a gentlewoman, fallen. She has decided you are a mystery, and it is doing her more good than the physician's tinctures. So I will not spoil it. A pause. "The rain, always the rain, at the glass. Were you always a nurse?" "No, my lord," Margaret said. "I was a wife. He was a clergyman. He died." She said it plainly. "The way you say a thing you have carried so long, it is worn smooth. After that, I learned a trade, because a woman must eat." He was quiet a moment. "I am sorry," he said, and she heard that he meant it, and it undid her a little, that this man of all men should be sorry for her, not knowing what he was sorry for. The Countess rallied, as the dying sometimes do, into a bright, clear fortnight where she sat up against her pillows and ate and talked and demanded to be read to, and told Margaret the whole history of the family in long, meandering afternoons. It was in one of these afternoons that she told the thing that turned the whole story, though she did not know she was turning it. "Julian's brother," she said. "Edmund the younger. You will have heard the county say Julian buried his heart with him, and the county, for once, is not far wrong, though they do not know the half." She plucked at the coverlet with her paper fingers. Edmund was the warm one. Julian was always the grave, dutiful boy, and Edmund was all laughter and no sense. And their father loved Edmund and had no use for Julian, which was the making of one of them and the ruin of the other. She sighed. Edmund got a girl into trouble, a parson's daughter, somewhere south of here. 8 years passed. Before the old Earl died, there was a child. Edmund would not marry her, being a coward under all the charm, and their father hushed it with money, and the girl was sent away. And Edmund went to the war to escape it, and was killed at his first engagement, 23 years old, and never knew whether the child had lived or died. The old woman's eyes were wet. Julian has never forgiven himself. He was in London. He might have stopped it. He might have made Edmund do right, or done right himself in Edmund's place. He did nothing, because he did not know until it was too late, and a man like Julian cannot bear to have done nothing. Margaret sat very still with the book open on her knees. "And the child," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not know how it was steady. "That is the thing," the Countess said. 3 years passed. Julian set himself to find it. He would not speak of why, but I knew he hired men. He traced the girl's road, and what he found was that the girl had died of a fever on the road, and a stranger, a gentleman, had taken the infant and left it at a foundling place, and Julian traced that too. and traced the boy from house to house, and found him at last in a farmer's cottage half-starved, and brought him home. She looked at Margaret with her clever, ruined eyes. "That is Thomas, Julian's brother's son. He did not tell the boy, nor the county, nor half the household. He said only that he had taken in an orphan, his ward. He raised him as blood, because he is blood, and because Julian is atoning for a thing that was never his to atone for, and will do it until he dies." The book had gone very quiet in Margaret's hands, for the truth had turned over in the space of a sentence and shown its other face, and the face was not the one she had built her grief around for 7 years. Thomas was not her son. She sat with the Countess until the old woman slept, and then she went to her narrow room and shut the door, and stood with her back against it, and let the thing arrive. The mark below the ear was a Wexford mark. It had run in the Wexford line, and it had run, she now understood, in her husband's line too, because such marks are not rare, because 2 families 3 counties apart may carry the same small accident of blood and never know it, and she had built a cathedral of certainty on a coincidence of skin. Her own son, her august child, was somewhere, or was nowhere, and she would never know, and the boy she had knelt before in the corridor and learned by heart was another woman's grief, another dead girl's boy, raised by the very man who had spent 3 years and a fortune to undo a wrong he had not committed. She wept then, at last, for the first time in years, for her own child truly lost, and for the false hope she had held, and for the dead parson's daughter, on the same rainy road, and for Thomas, who was an orphan twice over, and did not know it, and even for the grave, dutiful man downstairs who was killing himself slowly to pay a debt that was his brother's. She wept until she was empty, then washed her face in the cold basin, and made herself think, because thinking was the only thing that had ever saved her. She could give the man the one thing he had never had. She could not give him his brother back. She could not give herself her son back. She had, however, walked that road for a year. She had asked at every inn and every parish. She knew, better than any hired man, how a lost child moved through the country of the poor, because she had been the woman that country swallowed. And, somewhere in her year of searching, she now understood. She had crossed the same ground his men had crossed, had perhaps sat in the same tap-room, had certainly known the same despair, and if there was anything left to find of either child, hers or the dead girl's, she was better fitted to find it than any man he could hire. She did not yet see how these 2 griefs might braid into one hope. She saw, though, that she was no longer only a woman with a private wound. She was a woman who knew something. The turn, when it came through the boy. Thomas fell ill in the last week of October, a putrid sore throat that ran to fever, the kind that killed children in that country every winter. The house went white with fear, for the Earl loved the boy past speaking, and the physician was 3 days' summons away, and it was Margaret who took the sick-room. Margaret, who sat through the nights with steam and honey and cool cloths and the small burning body, Margaret, who did the patient brutal work of keeping a child breathing through the worst of it. The Earl did not leave the house. He stood in the doorway of the boy's room, hour after hour, useless and vast with dread, and on the 3rd night, the worst night, when the fever climbed and the child raved, and his breath came in a thin whistle, the Earl came into the room, and knelt by the small bed, and took the boy's hand, and his composure broke at last, all 4 years of it, and he said, in a voice she had not heard from him, "I cannot lose him too. I have lost everyone. I cannot lose him too." Margaret worked. She did not stop to comfort the man, because the child was more important than the man's comfort, and she cleared the throat, and eased the breathing, and broke the fever the way she had broken 100 fevers, with her hands, and her patience, and her refusal to let go, and near dawn the whistle in the small chest smoothed to true breath, and the burning skin went cool and damp, and the boy slept, truly slept, and would live. And the Earl, kneeling still by the bed with his brother's son's hand in his, wept without any shame at all, and Margaret, standing over them both with the cloth still in her hand, understood that she loved him, and that it was the most impossible thing she had ever done. "He will live," she said quietly. "The fever is broken. He will be weak, a week, and himself again by the fortnight. He will live, my lord." The Earl looked up at her from the floor by the bed, his face wrecked and open, and years younger for the wreckage. "I do not know how to thank you," he said. "There are no words that are the size of it." "Then do not look for them," she said. "Sit with him, sleep in the chair. He will want to see you when he wakes." And she gathered her cloths and left them, the man and the boy, and went out into the corridor and stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, because she had just saved another woman's son for the man she loved, and she had no son of her own, and life, she thought, had a terrible sense of what was fitting. She meant, after that, to go. The Countess was steadier. Thomas was mending. There would be no honest reason to stay much past Christmas, and staying would be its own slow ruin, loving a man she could never have, and mothering a boy who was not hers. So she resolved to give her notice at the New Year, and go back to York, and her trade, and her narrow, bearable life. She had survived worse. She would survive this. She had not accounted for the Countess who was dying but not blind. "You are going to leave," the old woman said one gray afternoon in December, watching Margaret fold linen. It was not a question. "When you are past needing me, my lady." "Yes? And when will that be, do you suppose?" "Soon, my lady. You are stronger every week." The Countess laughed her dry rasp. "I am dying, girl. Do not flatter me. I have not the time for it. I shall be gone by spring, and we both know it." "That is not what I asked. I asked when you mean to leave, and the true answer is that you mean to run, and I want to know from what." Her clever eyes fixed on Margaret's face. "You love my son." "No. Do not trouble to deny it. I have watched you not look at him for a month, and he who has not looked at a living woman since Edmund died watches the door you left by. So it is not that. What is it you are running from?" And Margaret, who had held her whole life behind her teeth for 7 years, found that she could not hold it against this dying, clever woman 1 moment longer, and she sat down on the edge of the great bed, and she told it, all of it. The curate husband, and the fever on the road, and the child lifted from her arms, and the year of searching, and the mark below the ear, and the terrible weeks of believing Thomas was hers in the afternoon. The Countess herself had turned the truth over and shown its other face. She told it plainly, without weeping, and the old woman listened with her paper hands folded, and when it was done there was a long silence in the room with the December light going gray at the window. "So," the Countess said at last, "you have lost a child on the same road. My son's brother's child was lost on, in the same years, among the same poor. She was very still, and you searched that road for a year, and know it as no hired man knows it." "Yes, my lady." "Margaret." It was the first time the old woman had used her name. "Have you never once thought that the 2 roads might be the same road?" Margaret went cold. "My lady." Julian's men found the parson's daughter's child at a farm, and brought him home and called him Thomas, and were satisfied, because they had a boy of the right age with the right mark, and they stopped looking. You know that country, though. You know how many children of the right age move through those parishes, how many marks, how many farms. Are you certain, are they certain, that the boy upstairs is Edmund's and not another woman's? Or that your own boy did not pass through the very same hands, the very same houses, and end at another farm, another door, a mile from where they stopped?" The Countess's eyes burned. 2 women died on that road? 2 children were scattered into the poor. My son found one, and stopped. You never stopped. You only ran out of road to walk. Between the 2 of you there may be more than 1 child yet to find, and only the 2 of you in all of England fitted to find them. Margaret sat with her hands in her lap, and felt the ground she had stood on for a month tilt and reform. She had made Thomas her son, and lost him. She had unmade him, and grieved again. And now the old woman had opened a 3rd door, the door of not knowing, which is the cruelest door, and the only honest one. For the truth was that no one had ever truly proven whose child Thomas was, and no one had ever found hers. And the same rainy road held both answers and had given up neither. "You must tell him," the Countess said, "not to claim the boy to find the truth. All of it. Whose son Thomas is, and where your son went. My son has spent 3 years and a fortune searching blind. You have spent 7 walking the ground. Put the 2 of you together, and there is a chance, a real chance, of an answer at last, for him and for you and for that child upstairs, who deserves to know whose blood he carries." Her voice softened, which it seldom did. "And if along that road the 2 of you should also find that you cannot do without one another, well, I should like to see that before I go. An old woman may want one warm thing," Margaret told him on the last night of the year. She had not meant to tell him alone, at night in the study with the fire low, but the Countess had contrived it, sending for her son on a pretext, and then feigning sleep. And so Margaret found herself standing in the Earl's study, with the door shut and the man himself turning from the fire to look at her with weary courtesy. And she understood the old woman had left her no path but through. "My lord," she said, "I have something to tell you, and it will take a little while, and I ask that you hear the whole of it before you decide what I am." He looked at her for a moment. Then he set down the glass in his hand and gestured to the chair across the fire, and said, "Sit then, I am listening." She did not sit. She told it standing, as she had told the Countess, but this time she told it forward toward the thing that mattered to him. She told him she had been a curate's widow who lost a child on the Selby Road 7 years past. She told him a stranger had taken the child and she had never found him. She told him about the mark below the ear, and she watched his face change, and before he could speak, she told him quickly what the mark had meant and had not meant, that she had believed for a fortnight that Thomas was hers and had learned from his mother that Thomas was Edmund's and had let that belief go. And then she told him the thing the Countess had opened. "I do not come to claim your ward, my lord," she said. "Hear me. I do not say Thomas is my son. I believe he is your brother's, as you believe it. No one ever truly proved it, though. Your men found a boy of the right age with the right mark, and they stopped, because they were satisfied, and satisfied men stop looking. I, however, never had the luxury of being satisfied. I walked that road for a year. I know every parish and every poorhouse and every farm that takes in children for the parish shilling, because I begged at all of them. On that same road, in those same years, 2 children were lost, yours and mine, and only one has been found, and that one was never proven, and I am better fitted than any man alive to walk that ground again and learn the truth of all of it. For Thomas, for your brother, and, my lord, I will not pretend otherwise, for myself, because somewhere on that road there may still be an answer to a question I have carried for 7 years. The fire cracked. The Earl had risen at some point during the telling, and stood very still, his face in shadow, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "You have known this a month," he said. "You have nursed my mother and my ward, and eaten at my kitchen table, and you have known this a month, and you said nothing. What was I to say, my lord? I am a nurse. You are an earl. My proof is a gown and a memory. I have seen what becomes of women who make claims against men of rank with nothing in their hands. I said nothing, because saying nothing was the only safe thing, and I have spent 7 years learning to do the only safe thing." Her voice caught, and she mastered it. "I am telling you, now because your mother made me see that safety is not the same as right, and because that boy upstairs deserves to know whose he is, and because I would rather walk that road with you and find nothing than spend the rest of my life not knowing that I might have found something. That is all. That is the whole of it. You may dismiss me in the morning and I will go, but I will not have this on me unsaid." For a long moment he did not speak. Then he crossed the room to her, and she braced herself for the cold voice and the road and the trunk, and instead he stopped an arm's length away and looked down at her with an expression she had never seen on him, and he said very quietly, You saved his life. 3 nights passed. Do you imagine I would put you on the road? I did not do it to be kept, my lord. I know you did not. That is why I would keep you." He was close now, closer than propriety allowed, and neither of them stepped back. "I have spent 4 years being told I am a cold man, and I have not troubled to correct it, because it was easier to be thought cold than to be seen carrying what I carry. And you walked into my house in the rain and saw it in an evening, and said, 'Eat something, and sit with him, and go and do the thing that keeps this house standing.' No one has helped me carry any of it in 4 years. No one has seen it." His voice dropped. "I did not know I could be seen. And then you saw me, and I find I cannot do without it. And I have been trying to find the words for a fortnight, and there are none, so I will use the plain ones. I do not want you to go. Not at the New Year. Not at all. Not for the boy's sake. Though it is that too. For mine. I want you here. I want you." The fire was warm and the rain was at the window as it had been at the window on the first night, and Margaret, who had not been wanted by anyone for 7 years, stood in the small warm circle of the firelight, with the man she loved a hand's breadth away, and felt the whole cold armor of her caution begin at last. "My lord," she said, and her voice was not steady now. "Not at all." "Julian," he said, "you have earned my name 3 times over. Use it, Julian." It was strange and warm in her mouth. "You do not know what you are asking. I have nothing. I am a nurse. The county will say the cold earl was trapped by a servant with a story. The county has been wrong about me for 4 years," he said. "It may go on being wrong. I find I no longer care what the county says." And he lifted his hand, slowly, giving her every moment to step away and touch the side of her face where a tear had fallen, and Margaret did not step away, and for a long moment they stood like that in the firelight, his hand against her wet cheek, and her whole heart hammering in her throat, and neither of them moved. Because both of them knew that the next thing could not be unmade, and both of them, for once in their careful guarded lives, wanted a thing they could not take back. She turned her face, the smallest degree, into his hand. That was all. It was enough. He let out a breath he seemed to have held for years, and he did not kiss her. Not then. He only rested his brow against hers there by the fire. 2 people who had each carried too much alone, holding still at the edge of no longer being alone, and it was more than any kiss that shared breath, that decision made in silence not to go back. "Walk the road with me," he said against her hair. "In the spring when my mother is at rest and the boy is strong, we will find the truth of all of it, yours and mine, and his, and whatever we find, or do not find, come back with me after. I have never asked anyone for anything. I am asking you." "Yes," Margaret said. "Yes, I will walk the road with you." The Countess did not see the spring. She died in the 2nd week of February, quietly, in the night, with Margaret's hand in one of hers, and her son's in the other, and her last clear words were for the nurse. "You will tell that boy the truth when he is old enough to hold it," she said, "and you will not run again. Promise me both." "I promise, my Lady Margaret." The old eyes found her one last time. "Thank you for the second thing. It was never lonely. Not once since you came." And then she slept and did not wake, and the house that had been holding its breath for a season let it go. They buried her in the churchyard on the hill above Wexford Hall, under a sky washed clean by weeks of rain. And the county came, and saw the cold Earl of Wexford, standing at his mother's grave, with a nurse at his side, and a small dark boy holding her hand. And the county did what the county does. Let them talk. Julian did not turn from the grave to answer them. He only put his hand over Margaret's where it rested on the boy's shoulder, in front of all of them, and let the county make of it what it would. They walked the road in April. It took the better part of 2 months, the long, patient work of 2 people who each knew half a country of grief, walking it together, asking at the inns and the parishes and the farms, sitting in the tap rooms where the poor traded news of the poor. They did not find everything. Some doors the years had shut for good. What they found was this. At a farm 2 miles from where Julian's men had stopped, an old woman remembered 2 fever-struck mothers and 2 infants brought to that parish in the same wet autumn, and remembered that the parish, careless with the children of the poor, had very nearly confused them, had in fact for a season entered them under one another's scanty records, so that no one had ever truly known which boy was which. And they found at last, at a cottage on the far side of the moor, a second boy, 6 years old and grave and dark, taken in by a shepherd's family, and loved and half-starved in equal measure, with a christening gown among the few things that had come with him. A gown Margaret knew the moment she saw it because she had sewn it herself. So there were 2 boys after all, and the road had held them both, and neither the Earl's gold nor the nurse's grief had been able to find the truth alone, but together on their knees, in a shepherd's cottage with 2 christening gowns held side by side, they found it. One of the boys was Edmund's. One was Margaret's. And the terrible clean justice of it, the thing that made her weep and made Julian go still as stone, was that after 7 years no living soul could any longer say for certain which was which, for the parish had crossed the records, and the mark ran in both bloods, and the 2 grave dark boys might have been brothers. And Julian, kneeling on the cottage floor, with a gown in each hand, said the thing that decided the rest of both their lives. "Then it does not matter," he said, very low. "It does not matter which is which. They are both ours now. Bring them both home." They were married in the summer, quietly, in the church on the hill, with 2 dark grave boys in new coats and the whole scandalized county in the pews. And Margaret, who had walked to Wexford Hall in the rain, believing she had nothing left in the world to lose, became mistress of a house she had entered by the servants' stair. The story does not end at the wedding. It ends where such stories should end, in a warm room in winter, near a year from the rainy night it began. There was a fire in the great hearth at Wexford Hall, and snow was falling past the tall windows, thick and slow, and the 2 boys were asleep at last upstairs, and Margaret sat by the fire with a christening gown across her knees, mending a small tear in the hem, the same gown she had sewn 8 years before and carried in the false bottom of a trunk through 7 years of loss. Julian came in from the cold with snow on his shoulders, and stood a moment in the doorway, watching her, his wife, in the firelight. And she looked up and did not hide her face, because she no longer had any part of herself she needed to fold away. "They are asleep?" she asked at last. He crossed the room and sat beside her and looked at the small gown. "Which of them wore it, in the end? Did you ever decide?" "No," she said, and smiled and drew the thread through. "I decided not to decide. They are both my sons. That is the only true thing, and it is enough." Outside, the snow came down over the moor, and the churchyard on the hill, and the long rainy road that had scattered 2 children, and in the fullness of a slow and patient justice, given them both back to the same warm hearth. Inside, the fire burned, and a woman who had once been left in the rain sat mending a gown for 2 sleeping boys, with her husband's hand warm over hers. And she was not, in any way that the world could any longer measure or the county could any longer deny, invisible. If Margaret's road stayed with you, sit a moment with it before you go. Some things are lost for years and found in the last place, and some are never found at all, and a warm room in the snow is worth more than certainty. Thank you for staying to the end.